Mr. President, on September the 29th, an almost 800-foot cargo container vessel, the Faro, a cargo ship carrying 33 men and women from Florida, left port in Jacksonville, Florida, bound for Puerto Rico. There is a regular trade route between San Juan and Jacksonville, and a lot of the goods that the Puerto Rican Commonwealth receive are shipped by cargo container from the port of Jacksonville. 3 hours before it left port, the tropical storm that had been brewing had changed its status from a tropical storm to a hurricane. And over the course of the next 2 days, with communications from the ship, that hurricane started to intensify to the point starting out as a Category 1, Category 2, later as a Category 3. On the morning of October the 1st, so it's September 29th, the 30th, now this is the third day, in the morning, at 7 o'clock in the morning, there was a communication from the captain of the ship, first left on a voicemail, and then immediately calling back, and the person in the communications department of the company, the shipping company, talked to the captain, and the captain in a very calm voice on both the telephone message voicemail as well as his communication to the person said that they had taken a position where the ship was leaning 15 degrees, they were in rough seas, and they had lost power. And apparently in that communication, since his voice was very calm, had some degree of confidence that he was going to be able to get the ship back underway under power. Now, that is not a good thing to have a ship that is tilting 15 degrees in the middle of a storm, much less an oncoming hurricane, and with no power, because that does not allow you to keep it directly into the waves or either going away from the waves. Instead, the ship is going to turn broadside with the full force of the waves hitting the side of the ship. And oh, by the way, it's already listing to one side 15 degrees. Well, that was the last communication. The hurricane had turned in a southwesterly direction, and eventually, according to the forecast, it finally, but later on, made that turn to the right to start taking it north. And as a result, it did not hit the continental east coast of the United States. It's out there to the east of the Bahama Islands. And so it took, since the hurricane was still in the vicinity, it took our search and rescue efforts another 2 days until it would subside enough so that the U.S. Coast Guard could get in there, supplemented by the United States Navy, and start looking for survivors. Now, let me just say something about the Coast Guard. We have the Coast Guard in our jurisdiction in the Commerce Committee. This is an extremely professional military operation. I have spent time this past summer with the Coast Guard up in Alaska. They are so good at what they do that the United States Navy can take its resources and use them elsewhere in the Alaska coast, which includes the Bering Sea and the Bering Straits, which we share with Russia. And the Coast Guard does an extraordinary job. And of course, throughout the Caribbean, all around my state of Florida, the Coast Guard stands tall. They rescue folks, but it took them, before they could get their C-130s flying in, and some of those may well have been Air Force, but until the Coast Guard could get its C-130s and its H-60 helicopters with the swimmers that propel down from the helicopter to rescue a survivor. It took them that long, and they started seeing debris. I have seen a picture of a lifeboat. It's an old lifeboat. It's an open lifeboat. If you saw the movie Captain Phillips, where Captain Phillips and the people who had taken over the ship went in that lifeboat, it's a covered orange lifeboat. And they propel it off the back of the ship, and it dives into the water. These are just plain lifeboats. They found a life preserver floating. Indeed, they found a life preserver suit, which is a body suit that when in the water inflates, and when the helicopter finally got there, checked it to make sure there was not a survivor in it, they saw remains. They're still actively searching for any survivors. They went around, and in this particular case, when the swimmer went in the water, its remains in the bodysuit, partially decomposed, and so forth. Now, I can't say enough about the Coast Guard, but those that were on that ship, most of them were from the state of Florida. Maritime work is a part of our culture. We know the extreme importance of these jobs and the very real risk that mariners face, and they're tough jobs. They take you away from home for weeks and months to do hard work. Yet, without our maritime efforts, we could not survive. That's where the biggest part of our shipping from other places is on the sea. The mariners provide this critical service. They move products and cargo that drive our economy. Look at the economic engines that seaports are. Well, it's been a tremendous loss for us. Not a loss of that cargo, which was certainly an economic loss, but it's a loss of 33 lives. And especially it's a loss for the families and the friends who knew and loved the crew of El Faro. We share their grief. The loss of this ship raises many questions. So over the recess, Mr. President, I went to Jacksonville. I went to the port. I talked to the National Transportation Safety Board. I talked to the Coast Guard. They've opened an investigation, and I'm giving these remarks to the Senate at this time because tomorrow we expect a preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board. I went in dock is the sister ship, the El Yunque. One ship would be in one port, the other ship in the other port, and they would cross. In fact, those two ships crossed in the Caribbean within sight of each other before the El Faro, heading southeast, got into trouble. And so I wanted to go there because it's our Commerce Committee that has the job of seeing that these agencies are doing as thorough a job as possible, and we expectantly await that report. I know we want all of the answers right now. It's important that a thorough examination is conducted to find out exactly what happened, and for the families and friends of those lost on the El Faro and for the safety of all mariners, we're going to make sure that we get the answers. What would I speculate? Well, I certainly don't have the expertise in the sea, but if you get a call and the captain's voice is calm and he says we're listing 15 degrees, then there has been some breach of the ship. And likely there's water inside of the ship. And if in that same phone call that you get, he's saying, we've lost power, now we know that there is the making of a disaster. Why didn't the captain and the crew know that the hurricane had become a hurricane that was announced by the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center 3 hours before they left the port of Jacksonville? What caused the captain to think that he could sail in a direction for an oncoming hurricane that he would not get into its effects? Why did the engines cut off so that he lost power? All of these things we don't know, but we expectantly look forward to getting some answers, and maybe in this preliminary report tomorrow. And so, Mr. President, in honor of those lost on board the El Faro, I would simply conclude my remarks by asking for a moment of silence.